A young man known for his kindness, faith, and constant optimism spent the final weeks of his life on a series of unexplained road trips across Utah and Nevada, moving from town to town with no clear destination. His car was later found abandoned in a quiet community. Its contents suggested he planned to return home, yet he never did. Conflicting sightings, shifting timelines, and theories ranging from financial desperation to a possible connection with another high-profile disappearance have left investigators and his family searching for answers. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jalyn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is Stephen's story. Stephen was born on November 1st, 1979 in Amarillo, Texas. He was one of 4 children born to Rolf and Deanne Koecher. Stephen was raised in a religious household, becoming a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints alongside his family. He was active in Boy Scouts of America, eventually making Eagle Scout. He loved sports and would often be involved with multiple sports teams at the same time. He was described by family members as a fun-spirited person who enjoyed being around people. He was also a hard worker, especially when things got tough. Stephen was a caring person and was devoted to serving others. He took his service responsibilities from the LDS Church very seriously. Through the LDS Church, Stephen took a missionary trip to Brazil. He later became a Big Brother through the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. Stephen graduated from Amarillo High School in 1998. In 2001, he enrolled in BYU in Idaho, later graduating in 2003 with an associate's degree in general studies. He went on to attend the University of Utah, graduating in 2005 with his bachelor's in mass communications. Shortly after graduating, Stephen interned for the Utah governor's press secretary from September 2003 until May 2004. Following his internship, he went to work as a freelance journalist for the Davis County Clipper, a bi-weekly newspaper edited by his father. Stephen worked there from September 2005 to February 2007, during which some of his articles received awards from the Utah Press Association. In March 2007, Stephen began working for the Salt Lake Tribune's digital advertising division. Stephen liked the work, but he didn't like working the night shift. He also disliked the temperature inversions in the Salt Lake City area that winter, so after a year he decided to leave his job and relocate to St. George, in the warmer southwestern portion of Utah. To prepare for his move, Stephen began working with another online advertising firm, Matchbin, in October 2008. In April 2009, he moved to St. George, and a month later, his employment with Matchbin ended. The Great Recession was underway, and Stephen found it difficult to find employment. Eventually, he found part-time work distributing flyers for a local window cleaning company, but the income wasn't enough to make ends meet. By November 2009, Stephen was several months behind on his rent. Adding to his financial burden, in mid-November, Jordan, his roommate, moved out, leaving rent unpaid. During the first week of December, his landlord tried to reach him about being 3 months behind on his rent. Stephen's dad heard the landlord's message and reached out to Stephen as a result. Stephen seemed upset and said he had plans to have his rent caught up in January, then hung up on his dad. Stephen's parents had given him money to cover all past due rent, but Stephen never paid it to the landlord. Despite his financial struggles, Stephen was optimistic. He was actively seeking employment and was using connections from the local LDS congregation. On Monday, December 7th, Stephen gave someone from church his business cards to display at their work. He was hopeful he would have a job lined up quickly. In the early morning hours of Tuesday, December 8th, Stephen took what seemed like an impromptu road trip to Ruby Valley, Nevada to visit his ex-girlfriend Anne Marie. Witnesses placed him here around 11 a.m. Her parents were surprised to see Stephen because he knew she didn't live there. While at Anne Marie's parents' home, Stephen mentioned going to Sacramento, California to visit family and friends, though he wasn't sure he would continue in that direction due to bad weather. After 2 hours, he left, deciding to return to St. George. Stephen's sister would later report that Stephen has no family or friends in Sacramento. At 2:15 p.m., he stopped in West Wendover, Nevada to purchase gas. During his trip, he spoke to his sister, but he didn't mention his travels. There would later be some discrepancy about the day Stephen visited Anne Marie's parents. However, the debit card purchase for gas confirmed the visit took place on December 8th. On Wednesday, December 9th, Stephen bought gas in Salt Lake City, Utah after returning from Ruby Valley. 5 members of Stephen's LDS Young Single Adult Ward claimed to have attended a Mormon Temple endowment session with him in St. George that evening at 6:30 p.m. The statements of those 5 individuals contradict all documented evidence available. Stephen continues making transactions around the Salt Lake City area until at least December 10th. His phone continues to ping in the area as well. On Thursday, December 10th, Stephen speaks with his sister, and again, there is no mention of travel. At 4:40 p.m., he makes a purchase at a gas station in Salt Lake City for $7.30. A paper receipt found in his car also places him in Springville, Utah on December 10th, but the receipt had no time listed. By the time his mother calls him at 6:56 p.m., Stephen is back in the Salt Lake City area. He speaks on the phone with his mom as he makes the drive back to St. George. Stephen sounds upbeat as he talks about his plans to visit his parents for Christmas. During this call, he makes no mention of being within 20 minutes of his parents' home in Bountiful, Utah. A cash receipt places Stephen at a taco time in Nephi, Utah at 7:24 p.m. He arrives at his apartment sometime in the night of December 10th. The next day, he purchases food in Washington, Utah at a Jack in the Box. Washington, Utah is just 5 miles from St. George. He doesn't seem to go anywhere else on this day. At some point on December 11th, Stephen spoke with his ward's bishop, who described Stephen's mood as positive and optimistic about the bishop's offer to help find a job. On the morning of Saturday, December 12th, Stephen takes off on another road trip, this time heading to Overton, Nevada. At 9:19 a.m., Stephen's cell phone pings a cell tower near Overton. The reason for his trip is unknown, but Overton is near boating and recreation areas at the north end of Lake Mead, and Stephen was an avid boater. At 5:04 p.m., Stephen purchases snacks and gas in Mesquite, Nevada on his way back to St. George. Back in St. George, Stephen stops at a Kmart and buys Christmas gifts for his family. He left Kmart just minutes before 8 p.m. and made the roughly 30-minute drive back to his apartment. That evening at 10 p.m., a neighbor saw Stephen come home, but leave about 20 or 30 minutes later. On the morning of Sunday, December 13th, Stephen's cell phone pings to a tower in Las Vegas. At 8:52 a.m., Greg Webb, the president of Stephen's Mormon Priesthood group, called him and asked him to cover him at the Mormon Priesthood Executive Committee meeting. Stephen tells Greg that he is in Las Vegas, but he can attend the meeting if needed. Greg tells him not to bother. During this call, Stephen's cell phone was pinging towers on the northern edge of the Las Vegas metro area. At 10:53 a.m., Stephen answered his cell phone again. This time his cell phone hit towers at the southern edge of the metro area. In this phone call, Seth Abdu, Stephen's Mormon ward clerk, asked him to make an announcement while officiating their Mormon ward priesthood meeting. Although Stephen was scheduled to officiate the 1 p.m. meeting, he said that he cannot because he is in Las Vegas. At 11:54 a.m., a home security camera in a retirement community in the Anthem Development in southern Henderson, Nevada, recorded Stephen's car driving into the cul-de-sac, where it was later found. 6 minutes later, a male figure dressed in a white shirt and slacks walked in the opposite direction down the sidewalk, carrying something in one hand that appeared to be a file folder. Stephen's family believed the figure seen leaving the car was Stephen and that Stephen was in the neighborhood for work. He has not been seen since. His phone remained active and continued pinging nearby cell towers. Around 5 p.m., it pinged a tower at an intersection more than 10 miles northeast of where he had parked, and around 7 p.m., it pinged another tower located 2 miles north of the previous ping. Early the next morning, his cell phone pinged a tower another 2 miles to the north. At some point, Stephen's landlord sent him a text. Then, an hour later, Stephen's phone was used to check the voicemail. The phone remained in that vicinity for the next 2 days, suggesting that its battery eventually died. There has been no activity since. A day after the last cell tower ping, Anthem's Homeowners Association took note of the car at the end of the cul-de-sac and tried to find the owner. They looked through the car's windows and saw the flyer Stephen had been distributing for the window washing company. They called a phone number on the flyer and spoke with the company owner. They then left a voicemail for Stephen and later contacted Stephen's mother. Stephen's mother returned their call on December 17th. After realizing no one else in the family had talked to him in a week, Stephen was reported missing. Stephen's siblings drove to St. George to start searching. A search of Stephen's apartment found nothing unusual or out of place. It seemed that Stephen hadn't packed for a lengthy journey and was intending to return home soon. His family checked jails, morgues, and hospitals in the Las Vegas area, but with no luck. At one point, employees at an IHOP said a man matching Stephen's description had eaten there every day for the last 3 weeks. In an effort to find Stephen, his family ate there for 4 nights, until another employee gave them a more detailed description of the man, which led the family to conclude it wasn't Stephen. The Las Vegas police canvassed the houses in the neighborhood where Stephen's car had been parked. Another vehicle was seen on security camera footage driving up and down the street around the time Stephen walked away. Authorities investigated the driver of this vehicle, but it turned out to be a local real estate agent showing a house in the area. With the help of volunteers, the police utilized helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, and sniffer dogs, but their searches for Stephen turned up empty. In April 2010, a search party scoured the desert in response to a tip passed along to a former Las Vegas officer who was working as a private investigator for the family. In 2 hours, a group of 70 searchers were able to cover about a half-mile stretch. Nothing was found. Authorities reviewed Stephen's bank and phone records, but found nothing unusual, though it was later revealed Stephen never deposited the money given to him by his family to pay his late rent. They searched his computer and internet browsing history and again found nothing unusual. Stephen kept a diary, and in it he discussed his monetary issues and his ongoing bachelorhood. The tone of his entries was optimistic, and police found no information to help them find him. In 2015, a local search and rescue group organized another effort, this time going high up the hills south of Anthem. Again, nothing was found. In 2018, authorities announced they had no new information, saying, quote, "We know about as much now as we did the second we realized he was gone." Stephen's car and its contents suggested he intended to return to St. George. His family believes that Stephen went to Henderson that morning for a job opportunity. Stephen was neatly dressed and walking purposefully, which his family believes as an indication he was there intentionally. In his car, police found job applications and the flyers for the window washing company. Others had suspicions that Stephen's extensive travel in the days leading up to his disappearance involved some sort of illicit activity for income. A drug dog was taken to sniff his vehicle, but it did not alert to anything. His family did not consider his travels to be unusual. Stephen liked genealogy, and he often went on tours of cemeteries looking for ancestors' graves. Stephen's mother believes his recent road trips were his way of keeping himself busy. In 2022, private investigators hired by Stephen's family announced they were focusing on people living in the Anthem neighborhood where Stephen vanished from. They found information that police interviewed one resident who was described as excessively nervous when questioned about Stephen. In 2024, the private investigators said that due to financial desperation, Stephen might have been involved in something that was not in his best interest, possibly related to illegal drugs. The private investigators stated that while the motives for Stephen's actions were unknown, they believed Stephen was doing something for someone else. Their theory is that Stephen had agreed to perform deliveries for his landlord, who had a long history of arrests on a variety of criminal charges. The investigators noted the landlord's wife made public comments about an agreement Stephen made with his landlord to settle the overdue rent. Another theory involved the well-known disappearance of Susan Powell. Stephen disappeared a week after Susan disappeared from her home in Salt Lake City. There was speculation the disappearances might be connected. In 2010, the family of Susan's husband, Joshua, began making public allegations claiming that Susan had framed her husband for murder and eloped with Stephen. Steve Powell, Joshua's father, outlined the theory in a 9-page letter to the police and FBI agents investigating his daughter-in-law's case. In his letter, Steve Powell shared similarities between the two missing adults. To start, they were similar ages. Stephen was 30 years old and Susan 28. They were both members of the Latter-day Saint Church. They were both in West Valley City, Utah during the same week and disappeared at the same time. On the morning of Thanksgiving Day, Thursday, November 26, Stephen went to West Valley City to play volleyball. He then drove to Bountiful, Utah to spend Thanksgiving with his parents. That evening, he returned to West Valley City for pie. Josh and Susan went to Josh's uncle's house for Thanksgiving dinner near Ogden, Utah. That evening, they returned to their home in West Valley City. Susan encouraged Josh to go Black Friday shopping, and she spent the night alone in their home. On Sunday, December 6th, Stephen attended Mormon meetings in St. George, then attended a Christmas dinner at church. He left church abruptly for an unknown reason. This is the day that Susan went missing. The next day, on December 7th, Stephen returned to West Valley City. It is assumed that Stephen filled up his gas tank while in West Valley City, though this wasn't documented. It has been alleged that Susan paid for the gas and that the two discussed Stephen's trip to Nevada. The accounts of the next few days have been debated. Eyewitnesses originally placed Stephen in Ruby Valley on Tuesday, December 8th. The date was later changed to December 9th and again to December 10th. These changes were reactions to new sightings of Stephen during the week, which supposedly placed Stephen in St. George. Some people suspect that Stephen's friends attempted to quash early speculation connecting Stephen to Susan by reporting false sightings of Stephen in St. George, thus changing his timeline. Stephen went missing on December 13th, making him the second person to go missing from Utah that week. At that point, Susan had been missing for 6 days. In his letter, Steve Powell theorized that Stephen and Susan ran away to Brazil together. A few years prior, Susan told her father-in-law that she wanted to learn Portuguese because she traced a line of her ancestors to Portugal. As we know, Stephen had served a mission in Brazil and knew Portuguese. For that reason, Steve Powell believed Susan and Stephen may be somewhere in Brazil. Steve Powell suggested authorities start the search for Susan and Stephen in northeastern Brazil, where Stephen served his mission, stating Stephen would know people they might be able to stay with while they became established in the community. He urged authorities to check passport applications under different aliases Susan could have used. He suggested the pair could have left on boat or plane and provided different routes they could have taken to assist authorities in their search. Steve summarized his letter by stating, "I would like to give my thoughts on where I think they are and where to look to find out how they arrived. Why Susan would have abandoned her husband, children, and parents. That being said, it is possible that Susan only wanted this disappearance to continue for a short time and that ultimately Stephen abducted her and is holding her against her will, or that she was being subjected to human slavery or prostitution." Police investigated Steve's claims but found no evidence to support any connections between Susan and Stephen. Authorities later found a set of 17 spiral-bound notebooks in which Steve Powell detailed a disturbing obsession with his daughter-in-law. In one entry, Steve admitted that he secretly recorded Susan and later watched the videos while masturbating. He also wrote about going through Susan's laundry and masturbating with her underwear. He described spying on Susan while she was in the bathroom. Steve admitted he could hardly control himself around Susan and wondered if his obsession was sociopathic. In December 2003, Steve confessed his love for Susan. As a result, Susan refused to speak with him and asked her husband to break off contact with his father. His words became more angry after Susan and Josh moved to Utah. There is an unusual lack of entries between October 2009 and May 2010. When he resumes writing, he says Susan ran off with another man. In the end, Stephen's disappearance remains a case defined by unanswered questions and competing theories. Whether focused on his landlord, his travels, or the coincidental timing with Susan Powell's case, none of the proposed explanations have been supported by evidence. Despite extensive investigation, no credible evidence has ever connected the two cases, and the truth about Stephen's final days remains unknown. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Stephen's disappearance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media. And join me next week as I dive into another case.